Hello, D'Angel here, and this is my first movie review. And the movie's called Pinocchio's Revenge. The reason why I wanted to make a review of this movie is because, well, for one, I really like it, and for two, because I feel like it's extremely misunderstood. And I mean, I guess I could understand why, because the plot is not very clarified. I mean, I guess they could have done a better job in trying to get the viewer to comprehend the plot, but also because people treat this movie like a slasher horror, when in reality, it's a psychological horror. So, let's say Child's Play, Chucky, because so many people compare this movie to Chucky, even though it's two totally different plots. Chucky is about a serial killer, voodoo expert, who is, once he's chased down by police and cornered and shot, about to die, he finds the closest thing to a human, which is a doll, uses his voodoo powers to transfer his soul to the doll, and then he's still alive, but in a doll's body. This is totally different. And spoiler alert, the puppet was never alive. Pinocchio, his talking, his mouth moving, and the puppet moving around, it was either her holding the puppet, not knowing that it was her who was making it move, truly believing that this puppet is alive, even though it was just an illusion of her head. Even the name was confusing, and I could understand because when I first saw this movie back in the 90s, I was confused too. And the title, Pinocchio's Revenge, I'm like, what's he getting revenge for? Like, it didn't make any sense. But now I know why it's called Pinocchio's Revenge. And if you stick around till the end, you'll find out why. But I always like to compare this movie. I think this movie should be way more compared to Psycho than Child's Play. I feel like the plot of Pinocchio's Revenge resembles Psycho more than Child's Play. Because, like I said, two totally different stories, different plots, and we'll find out why. The movie starts in Tampa, Florida, where it's a very rainy day and there's a rookie deputy driving around and he spots a car that looks abandoned. As he's investigating the scene, he walks a little closer into the woods, finding a man who is bearing a child. You later find out that this is his own son, who he strangled to death. Not too long, you find out that in this town, there have been a string of murders. Children were found bludgeoned to death, and the community and law enforcement knew there was a child killer out there. Once the deputy catches him, he is under arrest, and the whole place becomes a crime scene. Of course, they find the child's body, but they also find something else. Buried with the body was a hand carved puppet. 5 years later, he was convicted and sentenced to death for the murder of his own son. However, his defense attorney, Jennifer, who's the main protagonist of this story, believes that Gatto, her client, was wrongly convicted and did not deserve the death penalty. So she tries to make an appeal. She admits that she agrees that he is responsible for the murder of his son, but not the murder of the other children. She truly believes that the real killer is still out there and that the murder of Gatto's son was a crime of passion.
Is not valid grounds for an appeal.
But Judge Olson referred to the other homicides during sentencing. So even though my client was never tried as a serial killer, he was convicted and sentenced as one.
Even though he was never charged for any of the other murders, Jennifer feels that there was tunnel vision with her client because the whole town, regardless of the evidence, still believed that he was responsible as being the child killer. Once Jennifer goes back home, she's looking through some crime scene photos of the other murders, trying to figure out how she can appeal her client's death sentence. Now you see a very loving mother and daughter relationship, but what you will find out eventually in the movie is that Zoe, who is the daughter, has psychological problems and very repressed memories from getting bullied and developing a grudge on her father, who divorced her mother and moved across the country to Los Angeles. And she felt completely abandoned by him and started to develop a depression, feeling extremely lonely to the point where it was suffocating her. And she was paranoid about people leaving her, losing her mother, losing the rest of the people that she can depend on. Jennifer returns to her office and she had requested evidence of the crime scene. That's when we're once again introduced to the same puppet that Gato buried with his son, or tried to bury. Then we skip to Zoe being a regular little girl in school, and we learned that she's not just a bully victim, but she's also extremely intelligent. And this makes sense. People who usually have psychological problems tend to be very intelligent.
I think what it's saying is that bad things don't always look bad. Sometimes even look good.
Back in death row, Jennifer tells her client that there's a possibility he can avoid the death penalty. However, Gato admits to killing his own son. Jennifer agrees, but she also says that he is not responsible for the other murders. But Gato falsely confesses of killing the other children. Jennifer is not buying this and knows that Gato is trying to protect someone.
But I know you didn't commit those other murders. And that means the real killer is out there somewhere. There's no one out there.
We also learn that Gato personally hand-carved the puppet as a present for his son, showing that they had a very loving father and son relationship. Then right here we see how Zoe gets bullied by a girl who seems that she's been her bully for a very long time. She steals her birthday card invitations and they basically get in a little scuffle where Zoe bites her in the ear, showing her aggression and her anger towards the people she feels wrong her. Here we are introduced to Zoe's therapist, and we find out that Zoe has such a very huge grudge on her father to the point where she wants to believe that he doesn't even exist. When her therapist says that sometimes you just have to forgive people, and she says, "Forgive who?" Beth, who was the bully at school, her mother calls Jennifer and they talk about the scuffle that happened at school and that her daughter needed to get stitches on her ear because Zoe had bitten her so hard to the point where she was bleeding. And she was very mad. And instead of defending Zoe, Jennifer grounds her for 2 weeks, even though her birthday is just around the corner. This is another sign of Zoe believing that the people she feels are supposed to protect her and defend her the most are turning their back on her. Her father calls to wish her an early happy birthday and to try to talk to her about what happened, but she refuses to talk to her father. Right here, you could see the pain in Zoe's eyes and how she just feels alone, abandoned, and like she couldn't depend on anyone. Back in court, they said that even though Gato is not convicted of the other murders, being a one time killer is just as guilty as being a multiple killer, and so the death sentence was still on the table, and that he was sentenced to be executed.
Will you appeal the court's decision?
Vincent Gatto is a victim of public opinion and media hype. A broadcast
and then I refer to him as a convicted serial killer when in fact he's not a convicted serial killer. Will you be a witness at the execution?
You can see that Jennifer is very distraught after the execution because she admits that even though she knew some of her clients were guilty, because of how good she was as a defense attorney, she was able to put him back in the streets.
I deal with a lot of bad people in my job. I put a lot of them on the street. And the first time I had a client that I thought was actually innocent, I couldn't save him.
Jennifer, still believing that the real killer is on the loose, is told by one of her coworkers that if he wasn't the killer, why did the murder stop after his arrest?
How could the man who made this have murdered his only child?
Evil comes in all shapes and sizes.
So now, it's Zoe's birthday, and she's actually having a really good time. In this scene, you can kind of tell that her faith in humanity, in a lack of better words, is kind of being restored. But Jennifer finds out that Zoe has mistaken the puppet as a birthday present when it was accidentally placed in her car.
I'm sorry. Sorry, she spotted it before I could get it wrapped. Did you find that thing? It looks hand-carved.
As Jennifer and her boyfriend David are trying to have some alone time, Zoe grabs Pinocchio, and it appears to the audience that it's Pinocchio who's stalking them, when in reality, it is Zoe holding Pinocchio. But we're not supposed to know this yet. Jennifer and David are about to have relations when, and of course, she sees Pinocchio. And I feel that this is where she starts losing her touch in reality, because she's starting to believe that Pinocchio is actually alive. Zoe can hear everything, and this is when she feels that David is trying to take her mother away from her.
And it sounds like you and your mom really like David.
Yeah.
You do like David, don't you?
Yeah, he's okay, but
But what?
if he takes my mom away, then I won't have anybody.
Look, this is what you've been asking for. Pinocchio's just visiting.
No, first Dad had left me. Now you want to make Pinocchio leave too?
Zoe brings Pinocchio to school, children being children and bringing their toys for a show and tell or something like that. And of course, her bullies steal it and they throw it over a fence. And now we are supposed to believe that the puppet is purposely trying to kill Beth. What we don't know is that it was actually Zoe who grabbed the stick and tried to get her killed. Of course, she survives because she's a child and this is a movie, but the intention was to get her killed. Of course, at this point, everybody believes it was Pinocchio, when in reality, it was Zoe, and Zoe didn't even know it. She truly believes that it was Pinocchio trying to defend her. Jennifer is back in the office with a new client. She's trying to defend him and trying to find any evidence to find him not guilty of the torture and murder of a pimp. However, there is a piece of evidence. It was a recording that the suspect made torturing the man, and you can hear the screaming and the blowtorch, the burning, to the point where she felt so sick she had to go to the bathroom to vomit. But then she says she could not hear her client's voice on the tape. Therefore, that piece of evidence
I never heard my client's
was
voice.
worthless.
Excuse me?
On your tape. Without his voice, your tape is worthless. I'll have the judge rule it inflammatory. The jury will never hear it.
Jennifer's job is taking a toll on her, where she is in denial. And you'll soon see this with her own daughter, where even though all the evidence points to her daughter being dangerous, she refuses to believe it. But that happens later in the movie. Back at the law firm, or the prison cell, she's talking to her client who admits that the reason he killed the guy was because he heard the TV talk to him and tell him to do it. Jennifer doesn't believe this at first, but then she sees how serious he is.
I'm not crazy, lady. The box did talk to me.
Jennifer had to stay at work that night, so she calls her boyfriend David and asks if he can babysit her just for the night. David hears Zoe talking to herself, and when he asks who she's talking to, she tells him that she's talking to Pinocchio. And of course, David just rubs this off as a joke. But now we can actually hear the puppet speak.
Then I'll never get to be a real boy and be your brother.
And what people don't realize is that these voices that we hear is actually Zoe hearing it in her imagination. She truly believes that Pinocchio is talking to her, when in reality, it's just a normal puppet. Zoe wakes up to find the puppet gone, and she believes that Pinocchio ran off somewhere. So she goes to look for him. David wakes up and tells her to go back to bed because it was way too late, and that he will look for Pinocchio. So now the audience is supposed to believe that Pinocchio is hiding somewhere in the house. He goes down in the basement to look for him. The lights shut off. He believes it's Zoe, and it is Zoe, unbeknownst to both of them. And then once he walks up the stairs, an unseen figure knocks the door on David's face. He falls down and cracks his head, bleeding, causing him to need to go to the hospital. And Zoe, going from Pinocchio to back to Zoe, if that makes any sense, she calls 911, and she's truly distraught and truly believes it was Pinocchio who attacked David and not herself.
Pinocchio, did you make David fall down those stairs? Answer me! Did you make David fall down those stairs?
No.
Zoe's back in one of her therapy sessions, and the therapist has to walk out for just a second. As Zoe's alone with Pinocchio, we see the doll actually move its mouth and talk. Little do we know that, once again, this is all in Zoe's head, and the only person who could see this is Zoe.
Are you sure you didn't?
What do you mean?
You know.
No, I don't. You're the one who slammed the door in his face.
Are you sure?
Who else could have it been?
Who do you think?
Oh, no. It wasn't me. It was you.
How do you know?
Shut up.
Did you see me?
Shut up.
If you weren't there, how can you be so sure it was me?
Shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up!
Zoe is afraid of being committed because of what happened to David. And then Pinocchio tells Zoe that he can go visit David and tell him that it was him and not her. And the only way that he can walk is if she cuts his strings. Only if he promises to be good. So she does it, and then we see Pinocchio run outside and Zoe run outside. Once again, all in Zoe's head. It's her imagination, her delusion, her psychological problems. All of a sudden, an unseen figure is seen lurking around the hospital. Nobody even pays attention. The audience right now is probably thinking, how does nobody notice a puppet walking around and nobody is saying anything? Like, there's no way. Because it wasn't Pinocchio, it was Zoe. Zoe, being Pinocchio right now, unplugs the machinery that is keeping David alive, and unfortunately, he slowly dies. Jennifer gets a call from David's mother, telling her that David had passed away. Jennifer very confused because she had just recently called the hospital and they said that he was in stable condition. Zoe's therapist wanted to meet up with Jennifer and show her footage of their last session when he had to step out for a second and Zoe was left alone with the puppet. And what they see is Zoe talking to herself.
You're the one who slapped
At this
me in the
point,
face.
we kind of are wondering,
Who else could have it?
is she just imagining all of this?
Oh, no. It
And
wasn't me.
Zoe's
It was
therapist says
you.
that she needs to be committed
Shut
because
up.
she's very disturbed
Shut
and obviously not right in the head. But Jennifer, being the defense attorney she is, would defend her daughter more than any
How
client
much
out
more
there.
should have Zoe committed?
No.
But she's obviously dangerous to herself as well as others.
Spare me the lecture, Doctor. I deal with dangerous people every day. I know what evil looks like. I see it in the eyes of my clients, and I'm telling you, I don't see it in my daughter.
Nobody said anything about evil, but she's a very disturbed little girl.
She dialed 911. She saved David's life, for Christ's sake.
You kind of see some denial in Jennifer
Hey,
when
where's Zoe?
she comes back to the house
Zoe,
and
where's she?
finds Zoe's
What
slippers
did I
all
hit it?
muddy, knowing
Why
that
does he
she
smell?
left outside
How did
in
these
the
get
middle of
muddy?
the night, just
I
around the
know there's no
time
way
when
found his
David
way
was
from this
killed.
way.
She confronts Zoe
Where did
and
you go last night?
asks her, "Did you do it? Did you kill
Where
David?"
did you go last
And
night?
Zoe, sounding as genuine as she can,
Lie to me. Your son was in the
promised
eyes of
that she
Almighty.
didn't do it, but she thinks
Wait, I went
Pinocchio did.
outside.
In the middle of the night? Why? Zoe, why?
I wanted to go to the hospital, okay? To see David.
Did you? Did you?
No, I couldn't find it. I got lost, so I came home.
Are you sure? Are you sure you didn't go to the hospital?
No, honest. Well, I think Pinocchio did.
That's it.
What are you doing?
Keep in mind, this isn't
Don't
Zoe
you
trying
move.
to lie her way out of this. This is Zoe truly believing that it was Pinocchio who killed David, even though in reality it was her. Jennifer, hearing this, doesn't know what to think, but she grabs Pinocchio and throws him in her trunk, and we don't know what she did with the puppet after this. But the audience is supposed to believe that it's still alive. We see, first point of view, somebody lurking around the house in the middle of the night, grabbing a knife, and then creeping up to Jennifer as if they're ready to kill her, only to find out that it was Zoe standing there. So, this part explains that Zoe slash Pinocchio is mad that Jennifer took the one thing that kept her company, that stopped her loneliness, and that made her happy. And now he or she wanted revenge. But then once Jennifer turns the light on, she goes back to her Zoe mentality and says that she was just trying to protect her from Pinocchio, truly meaning it, truly believing that the puppet was out to kill her for taking him away from Zoe. Jennifer goes to work, but then right after, she goes back to the church where she befriended the priest. And she tells him that she had a revelation, an epiphany of some sort, and that she finally figured out who was the real person responsible for the other children being murdered. It wasn't Gatto, it was his son. Gatto found out that his son was going around bludgeoning children to death, and he stopped him the only way he could and took the blame for the rest of the murders because regardless, he still loved his son.
And he stopped him the only way he knew how. That's why all the murders stopped after that night. Not because Gatto was arrested, but because the real killer was dead.
Do you really believe that a child that young is capable of that much evil?
It's possible that Zoe and Gatto's son
His neighbor's
both
dog.
had the
He told
same
him to
mental
kill.
health problems.
the guy in the Texas Tower, he heard voices in his
But
head.
Jennifer, still being in denial,
We just assumed
is
you were
trying to
insane. But
believe
what
that
if
it's
what
some
if they
sort
really
of
did hear those
evil
voices?
force, evil powers, even mentioning real life
Some kind of
killers
demon or evil
who
force was
actually had
talking to them,
delusions
manipulating them, making
of
them into
people
killers.
telling them to kill, such as the son of Sam, who swore, and people believed it because of how genuine he sounded, that a dog was telling him to kill.
I'm not so sure that one would take the form of a dog.
Why not? Why not a dog? Or a disembodied voice? Or a television? Or a puppet?
Back at the house, Zoe was talking to her nanny, saying that she was worried Pinocchio was going to hurt her mother for taking him away from her. And her nanny reminds her that she found a conscience for him. It was a cricket from science class. When she goes to check on the cricket, she sees that it's smashed, it's crushed. And of course, the audience is supposed to believe that the puppet did this. And Zoe screams, and the nanny is going to check on Zoe when an unknown figure hits the nanny with a poker and starts bludgeoning her to death with it. You don't ever see a wooden hand or anything. What people don't realize about this scene is that it was Zoe being Zoe, running up, scared out of her mind, believing that Pinocchio was back in the house, but then going back to her Pinocchio mentality, and then grabbing the poker, walking downstairs, and killing her nanny, not knowing that it was her. Jennifer returns home, and it's starting to rain very heavily, just like in the very beginning of the movie. She goes inside and sees that all the lights are off, and she senses danger. Right here, we once again see the denial in Jennifer, because she truly suspects that her daughter is deranged. So she goes to the kitchen to grab a knife to protect herself, but then has second thoughts and asks herself what she's doing and puts the knife back in the cover. Then she's walking around and she finds the nanny's dead body. Zoe is right there, and I believe this is her in her Pinocchio state of mind, running away from her and hitting Jennifer right in the head, where she begins to hallucinate.
Evil comes in all shapes and sizes. You really believe that a child that young is capable of that much? She's a very disturbed little girl.
Zoe is back to her normal mentality, believing that she took the poker away from Pinocchio. But then she goes back to her Pinocchio state of mind and runs away. Jennifer is trying to look for her. Zoe grabs the knife that Jennifer was just holding a few minutes before and then walks behind the couch. Jennifer sees a puppet because she's in so much denial, she refuses to believe that her daughter is responsible for these murders. And because Zoe, for weeks now, has been putting it in her head that it was Pinocchio who was responsible, that Pinocchio is alive, that Pinocchio is dangerous, she sees a puppet and not her own daughter. And, of course, she got struck in the head so hard to the point she was bleeding, probably having a concussion, and was hallucinating. And now we see the puppet try to attack Jennifer, but what the audience doesn't realize yet is that this is actually Zoe trying to attack her own mother. She hears her daughter crying out for her, causing Jennifer to scream out to get out of the house. This is Zoe going from Pinocchio to Zoe, and then back to Pinocchio, because once she stands up, the room's quiet, and then you can hear laughter. And I truly believe this was Zoe laughing, which is really creepy. And then she's attacked by Zoe being Pinocchio right now. And then once she tries to escape and leave the house, Zoe goes back to being Zoe and asks for help from her mother. This stops her from leaving the house, and then she looks around, but then Zoe goes back to being Pinocchio and tries to kill her. Jennifer is able to overpower the puppet and throws it into a glass coffee table. At this point, her head is recovering right now, and her hallucinations are going away because once she goes to check on the puppet, she sees Zoe in his place. At this point, it is revealed that it was Zoe who was the killer all along. Zoe is finally committed to a psych ward, and Jennifer, once again, being in denial, a defense attorney, going out of her mind, not wanting to believe that it was her daughter, saying that it was the puppet, yet the therapist explains.
She killed your nanny and your boyfriend, and she almost killed you.
I keep telling you it wasn't her.
The room was dark. You were suffering from a severe concussion.
I know what I saw.
Tell me something. Did you see the puppet move before or after you were hit in the head?
I know what I saw. And I'm gonna get my daughter out of here no matter how long it takes.
Head injury was so severe that she, of course, was going to be hallucinating. And added with her denial and her years of experience defending guilty people, she was never going to accept that it was her daughter. And now, in the end, we wonder, was it Zoe or was it Pinocchio? And I'm pretty sure that very last part of the coffee table scene proves that it was Zoe. Because when she threw the puppet into the coffee table, it was Zoe that she threw in there. And that's why we see her in the puppet's place. So that's basically the movie. And I want to know if this clarified a lot of things. Now, as for the title, Pinocchio's Revenge, it should be more like Zoe's Revenge, because Zoe, who felt abandoned by her father, bullied by kids at school, feeling that her mother was being taken away, feeling that her mother was turning her back on her, she was miserable, lonely, and just felt like she had nobody, and she found refuge through this puppet. And in the end, she truly believed that this puppet was alive and that the puppet wanted to get revenge for Zoe, even though it was Zoe who was causing all these murders and attacks. I hope that makes sense. I hope I did a good job in this video, even though it's not the most professional. But tell me what you think about the movie after you see this review. Maybe I could be wrong. This is my personal opinion about the plot of this movie. But after watching it so many times, I feel like this is the one that makes the most sense. I don't believe that the puppet was ever alive. I don't believe that Zoe, there was like some evil magical powers in the puppet or stuff like that. Because psychological problems, psychotic disorders truly exist, even in children. And it's pretty scary because these types of mental illness are real, and they could get worse when you feel miserable, rejected, bullied, hurt, abandoned. So there's nothing. How do you say it? I feel like in this movie, there's nothing There's no superstition, just mental health issues, stuff that could actually happen in real life. But because the movie doesn't really make it so specific and clear, a lot of people were confused about like what this movie was about, to the point where a lot of people believed that it was about a puppet who came to life and started killing people, when in reality it was not. Like I said, there's a difference between slasher films, slasher horrors, and psychological horrors. Just like in Psycho, Norman Bates truly believed that his mother was alive, even though his mother was dead, and he would dress up as his mother, not knowing that he's doing it. and then he would go from being his mother, the deranged killer, back to Norman, the normal shy mama's boy, back to her mother, but it was the same person. I hope this makes sense. I mean, if you guys watched the movie Psycho, you probably would understand what I'm trying to say. But yeah, that's basically it. Tell me what you think. Please subscribe. If I get enough subscribers, if I reach 1,000, I will buy a microphone and try to make these videos of way better quality. In way better quality. Alright, you guys. Thank you.